Well, good evening, everyone. Hopefully y'all can hear me out there. My name is Johnny Rogers. I coordinate the Amazing Grazing program for NC State. And I'm really pleased to welcome you this evening to the Pastureland Ecology webinar series. This event is supported by an NRCS Conservation and Collaboration grant. And this evening's webinar series is intended to give participants an understanding of the principles and underlying pasture ecosystem and how the manager can interact productively with the system. The faculty of Amazing Grazing present a national training program for the Natural Resource Conservation Service, and these presentations are the basis for that program. Look for hands-on Amazing Grazing workshops across North Carolina in 2023, which will complement this basic information. So let me stop sharing here. And to start us, our first presentation this evening is from Dr. Deidre Harmon. Dr. Harmon is the mountain livestock specialist for North Carolina Cooperative Extension Service, stationed at the Mountain Research Station in Waynesville, North Carolina. Her program focuses on the utilization of byproduct feeds, especially brewer's grains, and the understanding of forage species variety and management practices, how it influences yield and forage quality. Recent studies have compared all available commercial varieties of novel endophyte tall fescue at 3 locations across the state, and how a nurse crop of oats or wheat influences the establishment of tall fescue and orchard grass. So we're proud to welcome Dr. Harmon with us this evening, and she's going to talk to us about pasture layout and design. Dr. Harmon?
So thank you guys for joining us tonight. So I'm charged tonight with talking about pasture layout and design. And so the first thing that I would just wanted to kind of keep in the back of our minds as we go through this slide set is that pasture design and pasture layout is really unique to each and every one of these pasture systems that you have. And so I just wanted to show you this picture of my farm at home and my cows, because I have a unique pasture system and pasture design that works for me at home. So I just want everybody to keep that in mind in the back of their heads and think about some of these items that we're going to talk about tonight and how you can utilize those on your farm. So this is a picture of one of the pastures that we have at home, and you can see my cows are really shining here, looking straight at me, waiting for me to make my next move. And the things that I want to point out about this pasture here is we actually use this pasture to limit graze our cattle in the fall on stockpiled fescue. And so if you were here on Monday, you remember us talking about some different types of grazing systems, and the limit grazing is one of those types of grazing systems. Now, some of the tools that you may see in this photo here in the very front of this cow here, you can see that we've got a 2-strand electric fence. I will tell you that sometimes we use this area as a garden area. Sometimes we go in here and mow the hay. So we like having the flexibility of being able to take down that fence whenever we need to. Other things you may notice is over here on the back side of the right-hand part of this pasture, we've got a 5-strand barbed wire fence. And so our cows actually stay in here permanently. We let them in through this gate. They come in here and graze for a few hours every day in the fall, and then we put them right back out. Another thing you may notice in this picture is if you look right back here on the horizon, you can see some temporary step-in posts. We use 1 strand of electric wire to basically forward graze these animals on that stockpiled fescue. And other things you can't see is over here on my left, we have a really busy road. We have a 2-strand high tensile fence on that side. And so we don't actually allow the animals to graze this forage in the spring because we are spring calving, and we're worried that those little babies are going to be able to escape under that 2-strand high tensile fence and get out into the road. So these are some of the systems that we're using at home. You'll also probably notice there's only 1 shade tree in this pasture. There's some trees here on the back side of this pasture, but we don't get a lot of shade from that. That's actually outside of this pasture. You may notice we also have a stream here that's unprotected. Another reason that we limit graze this area is so that we don't damage our natural resources or our water. So think about all these things as we go through tonight's presentation and how you can implement those on your farm. Here's just another picture of a fencing system using high tensile fence, again, to forward graze some stockpiled fescue in the fall. And how do I know it's fall? Just looking at the trees on the backside of this farm, probably fall or winter because they don't have any leaves to them. So when we start thinking about designing pastures, there's really three main questions that you may need to ask yourself. The first one is, what type of animal are you trying to keep in the fence? Or maybe for some of you, if you have small ruminants, or maybe you have pasture poultry, what are you actually trying to keep out as well? So that's important to think about. The next step is, where should you build your fences? And what are our grazing management tools that can help us decide where we need to design, or how we need to design those pastures? And some of the grazing management tools that I'm talking about is our water resources, maybe any type of mineral tub that you have out there, or lick tub, maybe our shade resources. And then think about those temporary fencing options that we have that we can actually subdivide further, maybe a pasture that has a outside or perimeter permanent fence on it. And then I'm not going to talk a lot about this tonight, but think about how much you're willing to invest in these pasture design systems, because you can get pretty pricey, or you can go pretty cheap depending on what you're trying to implement. So really, our goals of designing a pasture system is that we really want to understand plant growth. We want to understand what our animals need, what classes of animals we have, the grazing behavior of our animals. And then we can start to think about how we can kind of group all these different items together to really design a pasture that's really effective for us on our farm. And so, when we start thinking about the farm infrastructure and what we're really trying to do with that farm infrastructure, obviously we want to conserve our natural resources. There's a lot of different natural resources besides just maybe water that I'm talking about. Think about those plants, and on last week we talked about the importance of resting and recovering those forage resources that we have. So think about, how can we provide time by rotating animals throughout our pasture systems to help our forages rest and recover and get the most efficiency out of our plants. We also have to control the grazing behavior by at least closing a gate or providing some type of fence to keep them out of those forage resources. Think about the animal lounging or feeding areas. Every one of us probably knows in the summertime when our animals are out there grazing, that they graze in the morning, then they go lay in the shade in the middle of the day, and then they go back out and graze in the afternoon. So what are some of those resources that we need to protect where those animals may be lounging all day? And then also along that, manure and urine distribution is also a natural resource that we really want to take advantage of. So how can we make sure that manure and urine is being deposited throughout our pasture system so we can take advantage of those nutrients that are in that cycling in that pasture? Other things, why would it be beneficial to think about a pasture design on our farms? We really want to improve utilization of that forage, and we want to maybe protect our soils and landscape. We want to be able, again, to think about that sacrifice area location. Maybe think about the trees that they're hanging out under. If they continuously are having a lot of hoof action on those roots, could they damage those trees the long run? Maybe we need to think about rotating our shade areas, and we can do that with some temporary fencing tools. And then, of course, our drinking water locations as well, and how do those fit in on our pasture system? So oftentimes when I talk about pasture design, I get I only have maybe 10 acres or so, and I don't really think that it's beneficial. And I love this photo of this farm here. This is a farm here in Western North Carolina that's somewhere about 12-ish acres, I think. And this farmer has about 24 to 25 different pastures that he has on his 10 or 12 acres. So anybody can design a pasture system that works for them. As you can see in this picture, we have some new lambs here on the left that he's allowing these animals with high nutrient requirements to graze first. And then he's following up that first grazers with second grazers here. As you can see, these females have not lambed yet. And so it's a really great system that he can continue to rotate around his farm to preserve his natural resources. We were out there for a field day, so this just gives you another perspective of what that farm looks like. And he constantly moves that temporary fence to make new pasture systems. Some other items that he's installed on his farm, he's installed these quick connects so that he has water in every single pasture system or every single pasture divide that he has. He's able to provide his animals with fresh water, which is important. And this is something that he installed just a few years ago to make rotating animals and make his pasture design work. So we're going to go through a couple of items here that's important for you to think about when trying to maybe design a layout for your grazing system. And when I say design a layout, this is for both people who already have a system in place. And maybe you think, well, it's not been working too well, what I've got in place. How could I change it up a little bit to be able to be more efficient at grazing? Or maybe you've just purchased a farm and you're trying to decide what to do to implement some type of pasture system. So the first thing that I really encourage everyone to do is collect farm maps. And when I say farm maps, I'm talking about an aerial map, a topography map, a soils map, and just look at your natural resources and what you have. I'm pretty sure there's going to be some others that talk about this exact slide here. But this is a slide from one of our research stations looking at basically soil phosphorus levels. And you can see that we've had some winter feeding areas in the front part of this pasture. So when we start thinking about subdividing this pasture, how can we divide this pasture up to try to move some of that soil phosphorus from this really dense area into some of the areas that may lack a little bit on phosphorus. There's a lot of resources and tools out there in order to be able to start designing a pasture system. I love some of the online Google map tools that you can actually draw some of the borders of fence around your property or around your pasture that you're interested in doing something with or improving. So, I love just figuring out the perimeter, thinking about the subdivisions and how much fencing that would take. And there's a lot of tools like this online. Google's just one of them, but of course we've got many other types of tools. There's also apps that you can download on your phone where you can go out there and basically walk the perimeter of your fence and put points down so that you can really map out the layout of your pasture. So once you have your aerial maps or your design that you're thinking about, take a step back and kind of look at that map and look at all the implements in that map to see how they're all going to fit together. So here I have an example of about a 68-acre farm, thinking about fencing it with these different types of pasture subdivisions. You can see we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 pasture subdivisions. Obviously, think about maybe some poorly drained areas, things that we need to think about protecting, wet areas we need to protect. Also, if you're in a place like I am, where you've got mountains and ridges, think about how the forage resources may differ on those mountains and versus low-lying areas. Some of our really steep hillsides don't grow as much grass as our bottomland do. So we've got to think about, as we rotate maybe through some of those pasture systems, whether we need to speed up our rotation or slow down our rotation, or maybe make our pastures bigger or smaller based on those forage resources. Here in North Carolina, we got a lot of old terraces and fields from tobacco land. So think about how we can work around those in our pasture systems. And obviously think about the trees and the wooded area. Do we need to protect those natural resources? Or are we using those resources as shade? So think about that. Working facilities, if you don't already have working facilities established, how are we going to get the animals from one area of a pasture to the working facility, especially if you're like me and have cattle, and sometimes you've got to get one up that may be sick, and a stocker operator that may have several pastures and are trying to get some animals straightened out. These are just some things to think about. What would be the easiest way to get them to the working facility? Are there any existing fences that we can build off of? Where are the waters located, and how can we get waters into every field or every pasture that we have? And then, of course, the gate locations, and I'm going to talk a lot about those later on in this presentation. So the last thing on the map situation is I really encourage you, if you're kind of taking an aerial from Google Maps, make sure it's an up-to-date Google map. This was a photo that we got off a line that Seth Nagy, one of our county extension directors, got. And then the actual pasture system, the actual photo looked like this. So just make sure that we've got all those up-to-date photos if you're thinking about maybe renting a farm and trying to design a pasture for some rented area as well. So the plant species and the location of those plant species are extremely important to think about when designing a pasture. You know, different type of plant species grow at different rates, depending on soil type, depending on nutrients. And so think about, I've already kind of mentioned this, but think about, you know, the size of those paddocks and the rate of rotation based on that plant growth. If we've got a forage that's maybe like, you know, orchard grass, it may need a longer recovery than something like tall fescue in the spring. Think about the slope and soil type. We've got a lot of areas here in the mountains that are poor and don't grow a lot of really good forage. And then think about those species that may be able to tolerate some of that trampling or close grazing, especially around the water systems and shade areas. We also need to think about specifically what type of animal or many types of animals that we may be working with on our farms, what their production cycles is, or nutrient feed requirements. And do we have more than one group on the farm that we may need to think about and that may influence our grazing and our subdivisions? Animal behavior, you know, preference for species versus landscapes. I like to think about crabgrass. I've got a bag of crabgrass seed here. Cattle selectively graze crabgrass over a lot of our other forage species. So if we have crabgrass that we're trying to put in maybe a winter feeding area, we may need to think about secluding that winter feeding area and only letting those animals limit graze that area. What are their lounging habits? Do different types of animals have different lounging habits versus, you know, maybe horses versus small ruminants versus cattle? Maybe you have all three on your farm. Of course, the number of groups and then the animal type. And so I've got a couple of pictures of some different livestock species with some different fencing types that we can use. Just cattle here, you know, cattle are pretty easy to keep in for the most part. We've got a lot of different fencing options, from barbed wire to high tensile fence to temporary fence to woven wire. Maybe you're using that woven wire to keep a very unique species in, like deer populations. If you have sheep and goats, we've got to think about keeping those guys in and what type of fence may work for them. Specifically if we're multi-species grazing on our farm. And then maybe even more importantly, what are we trying to keep out? What would be a good fence to keep out predators like foxes and coyotes? So think about that. And then of course, maybe for our horse folks, maybe you're not necessarily as worried about keeping animals in or out, but maybe you've got this aesthetic that you're going for. So we can think about that when designing our pasture systems. So I've already mentioned, you know, not just the type of animal or the species of animal, but also what we're trying to do with those different types of animals. Last week, we talked a lot about different grazing types like fence line or creep grazing. Maybe we're trying to fence line wean. So we need to think about the type of fencing and the pasture design that's going to best meet our needs there. Creep grazing on the bottom, we're letting those lambs slip through this little creep gate and go on to the next pasture. Maybe we're in the stocker business and we need a receiving area for stocker cattle. And again, creating lanes that we can easily get those animals up if they're there to get sick. Of course, crowd areas are something also to consider. What would be the best type of pen or fencing type for crowding areas? And then of course, you know, we're all concerned with what our farm looks like. Drinking water source and locations is obviously one of our most important nutrients on our farm. If we think about the animals and specifically beef cattle or small ruminants that are herding animals, the distance from water source influences if the animals are going to go drink together as a group or they're going to go and drink individually. We know that from some research that's gone on at different universities, animals are more likely to go one at a time and have higher water intake if the water resources are within about an 800-foot distance, a walking distance in each pasture, as compared to where they can't see each other. They're not going to go to the water one by one. If they can't see each other, they're going to go all together as a group. And then not only that, but if they're going together as a group, more than likely there's a couple of animals that are able to drink while the rest of the animals are kind of hanging back, waiting their turn. And we see a lot of uneven grazing that's influenced by the water distribution on pasture. So if the animals are just kind of hanging back, waiting for their turn to drink water, more than likely they're going to graze that forage resource into the ground closest to that water resource. We also want to think about maybe stream protection. If you have a farm that's got a lot of surface water, think about limiting the area of access, not allowing them to have access to the entire surface water area, but maybe having just a small area that they can access where there's firm footing in that area, there's dry soil, there's vegetation, and you have a less likely time for erosion in that area. We also want to think about how our forage species may influence the water situation for animals, specifically when we think about beef cattle and beef cattle eating in toxic tall fescue. We know that those animals are typically going to drink more, look for areas to cool their heels in, if you will. And so we can think about the forage species impact on the needs and water concerns as well. So here's just a couple of pictures about different types of water systems. Think again about it being in a central location. And this is just a big tire from a piece of heavy equipment that's been made to a water tank. And we've got a lot of different options for water resources. I love this picture here on the bottom left. This is really a limit use area for animals to come in and drink some surface water, but doesn't give them access to the entire stream. We've got a lot of different, basically, water trough options. The tires up on the left, I've got several of those on my farm at home, a concrete water here on the bottom, and then of course some commercially available type tanks as well. So think about which water system may work the best for you on your operation. So a fifth important topic to think about is any sacrifice areas that you may need. I'm pretty embarrassed by this picture on the back of this slide, but this is a sacrifice area on my own farm. We set up this sacrifice area in order to basically save our natural resources of forages in this big pasture. And so we had a sacrifice area set up just for that. So just a couple of other things to keep in mind. If you're thinking about dividing your pastures, maybe you already have pastures set up and you're thinking about dividing them so that you can have better use of your forage species on your farm. Think about the shape of the fence, and shape really determines the amount of fencing supplies that we're going to have to buy, but it also can really influence the grazing patterns of our livestock. So here's just an example of a pasture that we've subdivided. So in this big pasture system, we've made one pasture into 4 pastures. We made these into a kind of a square design with water tanks in the middle so that we can rotate through these. However, if we'd made these into more of a rectangle style design, put the waters on one far end of that pasture, a couple of things are going to happen in this scenario. One, it's cost us more in fencing subdivisions. 2, since we've got that water tank on one side instead of kind of that central area in the pasture, more than likely one part of that field is going to be overgrazed while the other part of the field is going to be undergrazed. So just a couple of things to think about here in this scenario. Not only are they going to overgraze that forage resource that's closest to that water tank or maybe that shade resource, but not only that, but they're going to put a lot of nutrients down in the form of urine and feces in that certain area where they're loafing, if you will. So think about how we can kind of separate those different resources from the shade to the water, even our mineral that we provide them, in order to try to distribute those nutrients as best as possible. Some of us may also need lanes to be able to move our animals or our livestock from one part of the farm to the other. So where are those lanes needed, and how can we design those lanes so that the resources, the soil and the forages under those lanes are stable, we don't have a lot of erosion? And then also think about the width of those lanes. Are you just trying to move animals down with an ATV, or are you trying to get heavy equipment down those lanes in order to maybe put out fertilizer or maybe spray our fields with herbicides? So think about that. Also, gates, where can we place those gates to help the existing fence work for us and work for our moving cattle? I've got an example of maybe you've got several pasture systems and you create a lane that you have your working facility on the far left, and we're trying to move animals into these different pens. I think about putting those gates in the corner, and then that can help us kind of natural flow of animals move from either the working facility to the paddock or even rotating paddocks as well. And now think about where the gate is. I highly encourage producers to put a gate where you can use the already existing fencing resources to walk those animals out into the lane. For instance, if you have a gate right in the middle of this big pasture, it's probably going to be pretty hard to walk this animal down to this lane. However, if you put that gate in that lane, maybe in the corner of that pasture, then you have basically two different fence lines that you can work with to walk that animal down into that lane. This is just a picture of already existing lane, and you can see how wide it is. It's wide enough that we can actually drive equipment through there and get into each one of those pasture systems, but it's not so wide that one person can't move these animals down that lane and into a pasture system. We've got other possibilities for developing lanes as well on our pastures with the use of temporary electric fencing. And this is an example I have from my farm. This is about, I don't know, 50-acre pasture or so here. The working facility is down here in this little corner of this fence. The blue lines indicate fencing. And so every time that we try to work our animals, we've got some of those really smart cows, the ones that figure out exactly what we're doing and don't want to do it. They know if they go in this facility here that they're probably going to have to be worked. And so it never fails. We're walking animals down through here. This is a really steep bank here where these trees are. We do have a stream that runs down this pasture here. And so it never fails that these animals will get down here and they'll see that working facility and they say, oh, she's not getting me today. I'm not going to do this. And they go right up this bank and they're right back into that 50 acres. So we've used temporary fencing to create a temporary lane that leads right straight down into this working facility. And so basically by the time the animals are in our temporary lane here, by the time they get down here, they decided, well, we're stuck now because they can't walk up this steep bank. They can't come back because we're behind them, pushing them. And it works well for us for a temporary lane. So think about utilizing temporary fencing to do all kinds of I guess, wacky things like that. And lastly, don't forget the shade. If you're in an area where you don't have natural resources like trees for shade, there's a lot of different options for implementing shade on your pastures or on your farms. So lastly, I think I'm almost done, Johnny. Just think about, what works for you on your farm. We've got just a kind of a sketch of a pasture and what we can do with this pasture system. We can go in here and put out some priority subdivisions. And if we think about the red lines being fencing, what have we done now? Well, on this steep slope here, more than likely the pasture is not as good as it is in some of the lower bottom land. So we can fence that off and make that a pasture system itself. And that way we can kind of speed up or slow down, or maybe even force those animals to go up there and graze. They've got a water system here. We've got a stream down here for a water system with a limited access area. And so basically from there, we can even further subdivide these pastures with temporary fencing or maybe 2 strands of high tensile fencing. And from there, we can keep going and making even further subdivisions. One thing I don't think I put in here is that we can actually have a gravity flow water trough that feeds from this pond down to this kind of rolling hill area to put in a water tanks there, gravity fed water tanks in that pasture system. So lastly is just some other considerations to think about. A lot of folks like to use existing trees for fence posts. And I will say that if you ever want to go and cut that tree and harvest that wood from your property, this will damage those trees, and you won't be able to salvage this tree as another income. Other things that I've seen, and I think that this was the design maybe many years ago. I've got a farm that we've recently purchased over the last few years, and that whole fence looks like this, where they've went and drilled holes and threaded this high tensile fence through these fence posts. It's almost like they thought that this would be electrified, and it didn't. So they came back and put 5 strands of barbed wire in on this post that they've nailed to. So what happens now is when this fence post rots off and we need to replace this fence post, it's not as easy as just going in there and unhooking the wire from it and replacing this fence post. And you can see that this is a brace. So we've got to take some different measures here in order to be able to repair this fence. Other things that we've seen is spraying under fence lines. Well, yeah, that controls the weeds, but also think about the erosion that can cause if you're in a highly erodible area. And that soil does not have any type of live vegetation covering it. We get some heavy rains in and we can have some erosion. Here's just another picture of just going in and rounding up those fence lines. So think about some other type of control for, excuse me, for that. Here's another pasture that's been done the same thing. And then oftentimes, nature does not like bare soil. And so by going in and spraying those fence lines to kill the vegetation, oftentimes we got a weed problem that comes back, as you can see in this picture where that has been done in this tall fescue pasture. So with that, Johnny, I'm wrapped up. And if you have any questions, type them in the chat box and we'll take them at the end.
Thanks. Thanks, Deidre. Great job. I think what I got from Deidre's presentation there was that every farm is unique, and therefore every grazing system, there is no cookie cutter grazing system, but I think Deidre did a great job of giving us some tools to put in our grazer's toolbox, help us build better grazing systems on our farm. So nice job, Dr. Arn.